Okay, today for the Developers Forum, we have a group from AMPATH here to present work that they've been doing, building a point-of-care system. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let them go ahead and introduce themselves and start us out.
Hi guys, so this is the AMPATH team. Here we have Eric, Alfayo, Simon, Alan, and Eli, and Willa. So that's the AMPATH team. So Eric will be doing the demo of the point of care app. So let me just share my screen. Can you guys hear us okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Hi, Buck. Can you guys hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, so we'll just take you through, we'll do a short demo on the application we are working on. The objective of this particular application is to allow providers or clinicians to be able to use this particular app from the clinic to be able to see patients. So we have created specific features just to make it easy for the clinicians within the facilities to be able to see the patients. So actually the app has got two important key features, as you can see, is that once you have logged on, the first thing is it will allow provider to be able to find a patient. So I'll take you through that first. Yeah, so once the provider, so ideally what we expect is that the provider will type in the patient identifier, and then once the identifier has been typed, we should be able to see the basic details about the provider. So the first page will show the patient information. If there is any information about HIV summary, like what is his latest CD4, when was he last seen, that will be displayed under the HIV summary. On the encounter section, it will simply list all the visits that that particular patient has had, and it will list them from the latest to the earliest. And then we have another section where the provider can be able to
The provider can view the vital history for the patient. Just, from the previous encounters, just the vitals that the patient has been, the vitals that were collected against that patient. And then we have also the lab data summary that displays the history of the patient tests that have been done for that particular patient.
Yeah, so this generally is to give the provider a quick view on especially the labs and the vitals, just for clinical decisions. The other section is where the provider should be able to pick whatever form and then fill out. So for this particular first rollout, we'll just start with the two basic forms. We won't go into the details of how of completing this particular form. So we'll just maybe show you a preview of a single form, but we won't go into the details of completing. The layout of this particular form is best that it's supposed to be read on a device. So we are making sure that all our forms, we're only having a single question on a single line. Yeah, so generally, the form is organized in tabs just to make it easy for the providers to be able to navigate. Very important, apart from the patient dashboard, where you can be able to see the basic information about the patient, the visits, the vitals. The other important section for this particular app is a section on clinical dashboard. And within the clinical dashboard, it's supposed just to help the providers be able to manage. The first things we are showing them is the daily appointments, the monthly appointments, and the list of defaulters. So when we click on the monthly appointment, so for example, for the month of September, it should be able to show us like who is coming in for a specific number for a given day. So we'll load a given section that a given month that show you the way things look like. So we expect, like, for example, if you look at the monthly appointment, what it will do is that for each and every date, it will show the clinician, the number of patients that we are currently expecting. And when the clinician clicks on any of this particular link, is supposed to display the details for that particular, the list of the patients we're expecting. And in case that particular patient is already in clinic, you can just click that particular patient. It will take you to the dashboard, and you can be able to review that particular patient and fill in any other details you want to know about that particular patient. So basically, for this particular app, those are the key features that currently built in just for patient management. So far, we have not gone beyond patient management. So currently, that is what we have, but we are looking forward to not only doing patient management, but also allowing this particular system to help us also do part of reporting. Yes, so generally, those are the basic features that we currently built into this particular system. Now, just something to add on about how this particular app, it's been developed using Angular JavaScript. We have added in our forms that are generally being designed using what Angular formally. So those are the main technologies that we are currently using. A few challenges that I'll talk about that we have experienced as we develop this particular app. One of them is just some minor bugs within the REST web services. Some of them we've been able to work on them. The other thing is some lengthy forms that we have, and we are really trying to make sure that we could still be able to create those particular forms and work within the app very well. Those are the minor challenges that we are currently facing. So, yeah, so the other thing I'll also explain is the mechanism that we have taken in designing forms. So we have taken an approach whereby we come up with a form schema. Our form schema has been divided in a way that everything that goes into a form, we have a form in a way that we have a set of pages. Within a page, we have various sections. So I'll show you how we have designed, how we came up with that particular design, and how finally we are rendering it using Angular form. So just give me a minute to step on my screen on that particular section of the code. So what I hope you can be able to see my our schema. This is still within the early stages of the design of this particular schema. This is the first approach. So the first approach that we adopted is that
can you increase the size a bit?
That better?
Sure.
Okay. So the approach that we used is that our forms have several pages. Each and every page would have several sections. So we are using JSON, and within the JSON we have an array of pages, and within a page we have quite a number of sections. So each and every section has a set of questions. So you'll notice that each and every page we have an object called page, then we just give the label. Then within the section we put the questions within several sections. Now you will notice that what we would really want, like for example, what you are currently seeing for that particular question 4, ideally right now we are using UUIDs for the concepts, but moving forward we should allow whoever is designing the form to put in either a UUID or a question or a concept ID or even a concept map, and that should be able to resolve to return, because we expect that the final schema that we interact with will be using UUIDs, because we are using the REST module to submit and it relies on UUIDs. The other thing that we integrate within the form are simple validators, just to help us be able to validate various sections of the form. So we have this particular property called validators that allows us to put in some JavaScript expressions or some custom expressions that can be able to be picked up within the API and converted into a valid, formally validator. So that is where we are slightly having some challenges to be able to do that correctly. But so far, generally, that is how our form looks like. So the bigger roadmap on how we want to design our forms is that we want our forms to generate this particular schema, and then we could be able to use the REST module to get this particular schema, save the resource in one of the tables within OpenMRS, and then have what we call a compiled schema, so that every time if we are loading the form, we don't load this particular schema that is the raw schema, but we load what we call a compiled schema. So that is still a work in progress. We are hoping to get there by the end of this particular project. Yeah, so that is it on our form schema. Yeah, so I will allow questions for now.
Sorry, I missed the first few minutes, but so maybe you answered this already, but how does this interact with the sort of existing system?
So, how does it interact with OpenMRS? Yeah, so, right. So what we are doing is that once we have developed the app, we create a that we simply put in the Tomcat, and that is, it runs within the Tomcat container. So we are using the REST web service to interact with OpenMRS when you want to pull data and push data to OpenMRS.
This goes on top of your existing large AMPATH database.
Sorry, I just missed that.
This goes on top of your existing large database for AMPATH, right?
Right.
They're using REST to get the data. So all the searching for patients and finding patient data, entering forms, getting observation data back are all REST calls to the OpenMRS system. There is an ETL system that they've created as well. They haven't really talked in depth about that, but that's behind the reporting parts.
Okay, so Didi is going to talk about that.
So Chris, I don't know if this is what you were getting at, but I think one of the problems that you've heard us discuss in the past is that because of the size of the database, we've had trouble querying it efficiently. And so we basically create, we have scripts that are running on cron jobs every hour or so, which pull data from AMRS ops table and then create flat tables of that data to make it easier for us to both do reporting on as well as provide information on a patient dashboard. So when Eric was showing you some of the features regarding the lab data summary, the vital summary, and then also some of the clinic management tools, those are actually pulling data from these flat tables. Rather than building something into OpenMRS to serve that data, we created a Node.js web server. We're using a framework called HAPI, H-A-P-I. Not for a particularly good reason, but mainly because it was fast and easy to do. And we're still trying to figure out where this kind of calculated data fits into how we're going to serve our app. Is that what you were wondering?
Well, now that you say it, yes, that is what I was wondering.
And let me just add a few things. You know, one of the things for us is one, we wanted to learn. We knew we wanted to use Angular, so we've been learning it and come a long way in terms of how to create web apps in that framework. Some of the things we know we've been duplicating from other implementations, like how to log in and perhaps routing, and then also representations of REST resources within OpenMRS. You know, one of the key features that we really have been working on over the past few weeks is how do we do forms. We've certainly been in a mindset of kind of how things have historically been done in OpenMRS with regards to, you know, having a form, questions on the form with concept IDs backing them, essentially mimicking kind of the model that HTML form entry did, with the hope that we could come up with a form schema, that's what we're calling it, that would be simple enough for a non-programmer to design, and yet powerful enough to represent what we needed to have represented. You know, we're only a few steps into that process, but we've come a long way. Rather than create kind of some of the directives like an ops directive, something like that, we decided to make use of a third-party library called Angular Formly, which essentially handles a lot of the rendering that you see. So, and it's a very powerful framework. I encourage you to take a look at it. Makes things much easier for us. Well, I don't know if my team will agree with that, but I think it makes things much easier. We don't have to deal with recreating some of the generic things that a form is supposed to do, and instead focused our energy on building this schema, which we convert into a Angular Formly structure that Angular Formly then renders for us.
So any other questions?
If folks are
How
asking,
does this compare with JSON forms?
Sorry, come up again.
AMPATH had something called JSON forms. So how does it compare with JSON forms? Is there any relationship between the two?
Now, for JSON forms, actually, it's a plugin that was never implemented. And for now, even the pharmacy forms no longer use the JSON forms plugin.
Then the other question, sometime back I had, AMPATH was evaluating whether to switch from InfoPath to HTML form entry. And it turns out that I think you didn't go that route. So any reasons as to why you were discouraged from using HTML form entry and instead decided to go Angular forms and something like that?
Yeah, I think it's not that we were discouraged doing HTML. It's only that we were focusing on building an app that would successfully run from smaller devices, and that is why we opted to go the Angular way.
I see that you build a schema in JSON and it looks nice. Is there any way you control the layout of the form? Because the schema defines the fields on the form. But is there anything we do if you want to define the layout and say, I want this to look like the paper form, stuff like that? Which people usually do in HTML?
Yeah, we actually, that is how our schema has been designed. Our schema has been designed in a way that we have, it's simply a JSON array object that defines each and every page. So we have this thing called page. And within a normal page on a form, you could have several sections. So we just picked up how a paper form looks like, and that is what we made within our schema. So I can show you how that looks. So if you look at like whatever schema you are seeing, so we have pages, page 1, page 2. I can show you how that renders on the app.
Are you allowed to have two questions on a line? Like,
no,
like
we opted to
not supported at all, or is it just that you choose not to usually?
It is supported, but we opted to have one question per line.
Curious, it really just uses CSS, so you can just do the CSS that you want to make it look the way you want it to look. But for Angular formally, it makes it easy to use built-in CSS like that for Twitter Bootstrap. And so we just opted to use that CSS rather than redesigning themselves.
Maybe you can weather this one, then make sense that also. So that we can show it.
Okay.
So they can see why you just do this one.
So that is how the form will look on a tablet, because what we wanted at the end of the day is that the providers would be using tablets to see patients. So we wanted something that could easily render on a tablet. Yeah, so if you saw the schema is divided into pages. So each and every page within the schema will be rendered as a tab. For various sections, so each and every section within the schema would have a section title, and then the questions within that particular section. So you could see, for example, on page 1, we have a section called the encounter details, and those are the details within that particular section. So that is how we are mapping whatever you saw in the schema and what is being rendered. This is equally the same with what is on our current paper forms.
Okay, so any other question?
If anybody is trying to ask a question and is having trouble being heard, Uber Conference, if you connect by computer, mutes you by default.
But we missed that.
He was saying that Uber Conference will mute you by default when you log in. So if you are trying to ask a question and no one is answering, it's probably because you're muted.
I just want to add,
Do you plan to do designs forms in terms of like, say, an end user doesn't know how to do JSON and stuff. So do you plan to have something like that, or do you have it already?
So we currently don't have that, but in our roadmap, we'll have a simple renderer that somebody would put in something simple and it will render that into a form reform. So that is within our roadmap, but it's not yet done yet.
Ultimately, you'd like to have something like, you know, creating a Google form or a, you know, any online form where you pick from a pool of widgets and you just put them in order, decide how many pages you want, and save the form.
yeah, I would agree with that. Although, you know, we'll wait and see if there's community interest, then we would be interested in building that or contributing to it. So, and this just brings me up to another point, which is that, you know, ideally, as we develop this, and I know as others develop their own Angular applications, it'd be nice to identify modules that can be separated from the core app that you're building for your own particular organization, so that things are a little bit easier to share. And really identifying what tools we'd like to build in Angular that would benefit everyone across the community, and how to kind of create them in the right sandbox so that it's easy for other people to make use of.
Yeah, I've been trying to push us toward doing more work of Angular against REST, and I think there is some minimal level of kind of agreement as a community in terms of how we approach Angular apps, that if we can agree on or have a general approach that is similar, it will make it a lot easier to share things. And most notably, I mean, if you create one massive app where everything is kind of intertwined, then it's going to, you know, or a lot of dependencies, it's going to be very difficult versus having a, you know, a kind of a pattern in which you can introduce new functionality. You know, I noticed when on the demo of the web application, the sections of essentially, if you know, the same thing as our patient dashboard, you know, something very similar. You know, searching for patients and wondering, are those separate apps? How separated are those within AMPATH's point of care system right now, or are those different pieces of one app?
The way we have built there, it's very, very modularized. So most of those particular pieces are sitting in their respective modules. So we just plug them in.
So I think also our goal has been to get out this version by tomorrow, actually, so that we can start using it in one of our clinics next week. I think over next week, we will be reviewing how we've designed this and figuring out how to take things apart. My understanding is that we have one index.html file, which is basically housing our app, and all of our routing is being done through one app. or through one file at least. And so things are in a position to be kind of moved to their own apps because we have them relatively modularized, but we have not really thought about that yet. And to be honest, before we do that, we probably would like to get input or a working group going within OpenMRS so that we follow a pattern that actually makes these things usable to other people, rather than we can come up with our own way of doing it, but I don't want to just do work that doesn't end up being useful to others.
Yeah, I mean, for example, the form, that's a very kind of shareable component, but the question would be, how is that designed or how do you implement it? I would imagine that you'd almost like it as like a library, a module that provides functionality to other modules to basically take a div and, or a directive or whatever, and just say, put a form here using this definition. Rather than presuming that there's going to be one way that people are going to want to render their forms. Like have to have a separate app to go and fill out a form.
So any more questions?
I wonder, have you considered, or are you looking at sort of doing anything about like much more touch-friendly UI widgets?
Okay, for now we're just
radio buttons, for example. Like for example, when we were working on our Ebola project, we did a big friendly buttons for the instead of radio buttons. I saw one of the videos had some radio buttons.
And how?
I think the answer there is, before we try and like really figure out what the users want, we're going to begin testing it out, in the field, so to speak, and over the next month or two, trying our best to take note of what would make their experience easier.
Does it?
We wanted to avoid making too many assumptions on what we thought would be useful for users. Come up kind of, basically using the Twitter bootstrap tools, and then from there adapt ourselves.
Doesn't formally give you some flexibility to render a particular widget differently?
It gives you that particular flexibility. So you could plug in quite a number of things. Like even most of the drop downs you see, those are custom widgets that we have just created.
Formally is agnostic to what you use. They have some built-in functionality, which makes it easy to get going. But they also make it easy for you to make your own custom widgets.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, to Darius's point, if there was a way to say, I want to kind of override, Darius wants to use the formally, but he, the Angular forms, but he wants to override, anytime a radio button group is displayed, display it his way instead of the default way.
Yeah, that's possible. Formally allows you to create custom types. Basically, you can wrap that in a directive and then wrap that directive as a formally type.
Yeah, it would be a little different than adding a new type would, to me, be a new widget, but this is more saying I want to substitute the rendering for an existing widget.
I'm not necessarily saying that. I mean, it's fine if it's a new widget.
Yeah, but if it's a new widget, that would mean you need to change all your forms.
Well,
yes, you can.
I mean, in my case, I would say build the forms from the beginning, but yeah.
You know, a broader question and wonder about is this model of forms in the right way to moving forward, or just kind of forcing this paradigm on the technology to make it easier in a different way? And I guess to follow that up, I mean, my understanding, I don't know, Darius, if you know, or if anybody else on the call knows, but the way that Omni does data collection is that they have apps that really just collect data and then they package these things into payloads and then submit them. But there isn't this kind of notion of a generic form.
Correct. I mean, well, they generate forms dynamically based on concept sets, but there isn't, I think, the idea of a form model particularly. I mean, it's, well, you accept that there's a REST web service for hosting parts of encounters, encounter transaction web service. So it's less form driven in this sense.
Is that, do you think that's the way to go, or is there? So I don't want us to get stuck in our own. You know, we just see things in one way, and then we've limited ourselves in the ways that we have.
And I think there's a lot of value in having user-defined forms like this. I also think there's a lot of value in writing custom code for UIs sometimes because, well, like I don't think that trying to build every screen of the application through like these JSON forms is the right way, but certainly having them is really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten a ton, and the whole community has gotten a ton out of what was built with HTML form entry. There are people finding other ways to do form entry, including yourselves, but you know, having multiple options is a great thing. I think that you know, part of the challenge is how much do you build in or burn in the layout into the you know, the JSON or the, you know, your schema, because there's always kind of a tension between the model of a form versus the, or you know, the schema describing the questions by themselves versus trying to describe how should it be laid out. I think taking kind of building on formally and trying to do that in a you know, use what you want to use kind of way is not a bad approach. The other piece is how are the data kept? Is there a model behind the form, and is there does Formally kind of manage that for you in terms of you know, having a standard mechanism, for example, when you have maybe multiple values for a question, you know, repeating field or something, being able to easily reference those, or are you doing custom code to store the data?
Yeah, so Formally has a specific way of rendering different types, and it does that. It has a model that stores those different types, and you could easily, since it stores them in a key value pair, you could easily access those particular values. So the key, does it automatically generate the key, or what determines the key? Yeah, so as you build the Formally field, it has a property called the key, which you specify the name of that particular key. So for what we have done is that the name of each and every key on a form is a concept ID. And you want to make sure that each and every field has got some kind of uniqueness. So it will pick that particular key and put that into a model. So for that particular form, for every value that you fill in, it will attach that key to the value that has been filled in for a particular field.
So if you have the same concept more than once, then you run into problems.
It has a custom field for rendering repeating. So if you have repeating values, like whatever you could see on a field, whatever we are currently displaying, that is a good example of a repeat value, and it will simply put that as an array in the model.
Specify.
Sorry, you're cutting out. I couldn't hear your question.
Do you hear me better now?
Yeah.
So basically, Formally has a configuration that you need to provide to define a field on a form. And we have removed some of those properties from the schema and just auto-generate them as we convert the schema into a Formally form.
Yeah.
And one of those is the name of the property in the model, which will store the value on the form.
And does it take advantage of the kind of the bidirectional binding of Angular, where if you created a field on two different pages and bound them to the same key, would they update automatically?
Right, it will update automatically. And actually, that at times puts us into problems, especially when we have two different questions that have been mapped using the same concept.
Yeah, and I think that's you know, if they are truly the same thing, then it makes sense that they would both update as, you know, that you would only have one instance in the model for a form. But you know, I don't. I can imagine within OBS groups or other structures, you know, something where you ask a question of one person and then you ask it of the other, that you're using the same concept but in a different context.
Yeah, so we have smartly handled that, and what we did is that for each and every question, apart from the concept, we are attaching in a random number, so that if, let's say, a given question is using concept 1, and another question in another group is using the same concept 1, so the random number will distinguish them, and the fact that they are sitting in different OBS group, that will also make them distinguishable.
And you can ask questions, I presume, that are not just concepts. So you can.
No, right now the way it is everything is a concept. The only thing, sorry.
Well, I saw an encounter date widget or something, right? So there's something.
Yeah, so that is not a concept. The encounter date, the encounter location, those are not concepts.
Yeah.
The other thing that we also added in that is not tied to a concept is something to do with the way we collect our lab data. So, for example, if you can see the lab data, the ops date is not a concept. So that will go in as an ops date time.
Yeah, but that's at the time that you're processing the form data. Do you have you separated that processing of the form data from the form schema?
Yeah, that is completely separate. So what happens is that once the form has already been filled in, there is a service that goes in and checks all the fields that has been generated, and then it creates a payload that is acceptable to REST, that we can now give REST to push that to the database. So the same thing that when we are getting data from OpenMRS, we get a REST payload and be able to push into different fields so that it can be rendered. So ideally, what we do is if loading existing data will simply update those particular values within the model. And once we put the value within the model, it will automatically be rendered in the form.
Yeah, that was something we kind of missed the boat with HTML form entry, and it was hard-coded, much like the form entry before it, to be encounter specific. And while most of the initial use cases for forms will probably continue to be encounter based, creating a form tool that doesn't have to be used solely for collecting encounter data would be very powerful.
Have you found the default OpenMRS REST Web Service module sufficient for all that you wanted to do regarding this, or have you done some custom REST for OpenMRS?
I would say it was sufficient, almost 90%. The 10% bit is a case where we want to that schema that you have seen and OpenMRS and REST it's been to do that, and we are also working on that as well. The other problem that we encountered, which we fixed the other day, is correctly handling types. So we had to do some minor fix on that so that it could handle all bullet steps. So those were the only challenges that when we are using REST. And also another thing that met with REST is when we are serving. It's not really serving, but when we are dating an encounter. So if in a with an encounter ID what you want to update it, especially if that are very fast, then it doesn't do it. So you have to kind of use the ops. Right?
Or your audio is breaking up.
To document OpenMRS REST Web Services and helping to take responsibility for correcting them. As you know, for us, our future is very much tied up with REST Web Services as a way of for us to consume data and moving away from using the built-in UI either in core OpenMRS or within modules of OpenMRS.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of folks, more and more doing that Angular versus REST, and I think I think we will continue to, and with your help and with everyone, try to build up the robustness of REST so it gets better across the board for everyone. I think finding the piece that we need to try to sort out soon is what is the amount, the least amount that we can share at the UI level, that in terms of basic approach or framework that will not predetermine how people do things, but will make it more likely that sharing functionality will be easier. We'd like to be in a world where you guys build this out, but then you look and say, oh, but the scheduling app that's using Mirabelle and the ordering that's being used by Bomni would be useful, and let's just pull those in and maybe you do a minor refactoring if at all.
Yeah, for that 10% that did you have to do it in a custom module, or did you try to submit patches to this module?
I think you're still working on those things, Boolean option, and wrote some. I've seen Wheeler working on that. So ideally, just the REST themselves. Same.
You know, the REST web services is often flexible enough that you can find it doing things even if it's not the way that seemed the most intuitive. That is being how we are handling Boolean, and then also want us to be able to the same way that format entry for HTML format entry and the info graph-based format. We can actually save our form, in this case, our schema, onto the server as a form resource. You know, we're hopeful that this call will generate because of you all. And I really kind of come up with a for thick REST services. And I know that we're contributing to that.
I had a functionality question. Can you reopen the forms and edit them? Or do they only show up for viewing sort of after they've been processed and by the ETL process?
Yeah, you should be able to open the form and view them as well. So I'll just try and load for you one that shows some this.
Now let me just qualify your question. For errors that have been saved, you can reload edit from that form. You're talking about a middle state where you're in a draft of the form.
No, I didn't mean a draft.
Locally.
Yeah, so this is an example that is loading an existing encounter. So it's to load, you can make changes to particular changes. Now, what do we only the changes that this particular change?
And still working out our, right now our plan is that, for example, as to most clinics, first they're vital. So we say our plan for the moment is that the first see the patient and collect data about them, they'll start the form, they'll create it, and then they'll save the form. And then the next is and add whatever data needs to be added at that point.
So, any more questions, folks?
I guess I think this is really cool to see. I would love it if you guys are more loud about the work that you're doing, and that, you know, as you run into issues, as you make design decisions and things like that, you know, talk about it publicly on OpenMRS Talk. And I don't know how much. I'm not sure how much people will ultimately be able to collaborate or not around tools like this and some of the pieces within it, but I think it's much more effective if there's a constant commentary every week or two of something coming along, being mentioned, like, oh yeah, this is what they're working on now, versus, you know, every quarter having a work in progress where we say, you know, it'd be nice to collaborate on big pieces going forwards, but then it's out of people's minds for the next quarter.
Yeah, and I think in terms.
I agree with you in principle. It's not as clear to me in practice kind of how we how we do this other than through these work in progresses. But
I think what Darius is suggesting is that when you come up, for example, to a design choice of should we do it this way or that way, and you guys are kind of debating it, have that conversation in OpenMRS talk rather than in a in a room somewhere. It's just expose some of your conversation about what you're doing so others can see it. And so,
yeah, or even after I'm not saying you even have to expose the conversation, at least expose the output. Well, I guess I would say, so when PIH started working on the Marabale system, we made an explicit attempt to say a lot of things publicly about what we were doing. We weren't really looking for a lot of input for the most part, but we tried to talk a lot on OpenMRS List about what we were doing, and we also sort of had a blog where we put stuff sometimes. And so some sort of model. Basically, you guys have started working on a big project, and I would say if you want the most effective way to have that project influence the direction of OpenMRS and find ways to collaborate around that project is by going on about it constantly in some sort of, it could be a blog, it could be just occasional posts to OpenMRS talk. I mean, basically, people are interested to see what other people are doing with OpenMRS and how. And getting some little update once a week will keep it in people's minds.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to use Scrum, and so a more natural point for us might be at the end of a sprint, where we can kind of
tell the world what you did in the sprint. Yeah. Share a few screenshots and on an OpenMRS talk page. It's
and perhaps the main thing at the beginning of the sprint as well to say what we're about to do, so that the potential for feedback from others is there as well.
Yep. In terms of, for example, the form stuff, in terms of finding a way to get that, evolve that to where maybe AMPATH isn't the only one using it. The most effective way to get that is going to be, once it gets to a point that you feel like it is modular enough that someone else could use it, would be to find somebody else that's interested in using it and investing a little bit of resources, effort to help them kind of get up and started with it. It's hard. It usually doesn't happen for zero effort, that you do just you create great things and then suddenly it becomes a big collaboration around it. Usually it takes a little bit of additional effort beyond just creating it to help someone else get up and started with it. Once you have two, and definitely by the time you get a third group that are independent organizations using something, you definitely are at that stage where people are thinking about it as the kind of generic tool. You don't have to get everybody using it, but you do need to get it to a point where someone else can be successful using it.
In spirit of this request, I just want to say two things that are on our horizon over the next, I would say, 4 to 6 months. One, we're trying to figure out, or I guess 3 things. We're trying to figure out a new way of doing our analytics. And right now, PTH is not probably the one that I would like to have us go in the future. And I suspect there might be others in the community who are also trying to think about how do we take OBS raw data and kind of make them into something a little bit more like information. The other thing is we intentionally chose Angular and JavaScript framework because we are going to make an app version of this, probably using Ionic, and then build an API for doing some sort of offline storage of data to allow not so much clinics, but instances where we will be using this in people's homes or out in the community in places where connectivity is unlikely to be. And then the last thing that I think you may have seen us mention on Talk at OpenMRS is trying to think about how to do sync and come up with a way of sharing data. Maybe it's by using OpenHIE or something else, but we definitely invested in
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for taking the time to share and kind of showcase the work so far. It looks awesome. You know, to Darius's point, you know, let us know. You know, just make a comment out in the dev category of OpenMRS Talk and say, hey guys, we rolled out last week and everything went smoothly, or we had a bump or two, but this is where we are. Just a quick note to update folks would be great.
Thank you.
Sure. Can you? Oh, you stopped screen sharing. Thank you. So, thank you for sharing. There are some notes that we took along the way that are currently in Etherpad, and I'll move into the wiki shortly after this call. And next week we have a discussion of what OpenMRS as a community should be or is supporting or does not support. That was a question. I think Ada and I think other implementations just want to have us communicate better what things as a community we're supporting, and finding ways to do that more effectively. And hopefully we should be getting much closer or very close to 2.3 release. So we'll have a discussion of where we are with that or any updates around that. So thanks for the presentation from the AMPATH folks. And thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully we'll see you on next week's call. And between now and then, we will see you in cyberspace.